This is Cousin Grussel of Rebuilding. He thought it was bullshit about how Dracula never existed, but guess what he did? And he was very, very vicious. Just few names have cast more terror into the human heart than Dracula. The legendary vampire, created by author Bram Stoker for his 1897 novel of the same name, has inspired countless horror movies, television shows, and other blood-curdling tales of vampires. Though Dracula may seem like a singular creation, Stoker in fact drew inspiration from a real-life man with an even more grotesque taste for blood, Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, or, as he is better known, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Tepes, a name he earned for his favorite way of dispensing with his enemies. Vlad III was born in 1431 in Transylvania, a mountainous region in modern-day Romania. His father was Vlad II Dracul, ruler of Wallachia, a principality located to the south of Transylvania. Vlad II was granted the surname Dracul, dragon, after his induction into the Order of the Dragon, a Christian military order supported by the Holy Roman Emperor. 8 grisly archaeological discoveries, situated between Christian Europe and the Muslim lands of the Ottoman Empire, Transylvania and Wallachia were frequently the scene of bloody battles as Ottoman forces pushed westward into Europe, and Christian Crusaders repulsed the invaders or marched eastward toward the Holy Land. When Vlad II was called to a diplomatic meeting in 1442 with Sultan Murad II, he brought his young sons Vlad III and Radu along. But the meeting was actually a trap. All 3 were arrested and held hostage. The elder Vlad was released under the condition that he leave his sons behind. Under the Ottomans, Vlad and his younger brother were tutored in science, philosophy, and the arts. Vlad also became a skilled horseman and warrior. According to some accounts, however, he may also have been imprisoned and tortured for part of that time, during which he would have witnessed the impalement of the Ottomans' enemies. The rest of Vlad's family, however, fared even worse. His father was ousted as ruler of Wallachia by local warlords, boyars, and was killed in the swamps near Baltini, Wallachia, in 1447. Vlad's older brother, Mircea, was tortured, blinded, and buried alive. Whether these events turned Vlad III Dracula, son of the dragon, into a ruthless killer is a matter of historical speculation. What is certain, however, is that once Vlad was freed from Ottoman captivity shortly after his family's death, his reign of blood began. 7. Strange ways humans act like vampires. In 1453, the city of Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, threatening all of Europe with an invasion. Vlad was charged with leading a force to defend Wallachia from an invasion. His 1456 battle to protect his homeland was victorious. Legend holds that he personally beheaded his opponent, Vladislav II, in one-on-one combat. Though he was now ruler of the Principality of Wallachia, his lands were in a ruinous state due to constant warfare and the internal strife caused by feuding boyars. To consolidate power, Vlad invited hundreds of them to a banquet. Knowing his authority would be challenged, he had his guests stabbed and their still twitching bodies impaled. What is impaling? Impaling is a particularly gruesome form of torture and death. A wood or metal pole is inserted through the body either front to back or vertically through the rectum or vagina. The exit wound could be near the victim's neck, shoulders, or mouth. In some cases, the pole was rounded, not sharp, to avoid damaging internal organs and thereby prolong the suffering of the victim. The pole was then raised vertically to display the victim's torment. It could take hours or days for the impaled person to die. Though Vlad is widely credited with bringing order and stability to Wallachia, his rule was undisputedly vicious. Dozens of Saxon merchants in Kronstadt, who were once allied with the boyars, were also impaled in 1459. The Ottoman Turks were never far from Vlad's thoughts or his borders. When diplomatic envoys had an audience with Vlad in 1459, the diplomats declined to remove their hats, citing a religious custom. Commending them on their religious devotion, Vlad ensured that their hats would forever remain on their heads by having the hats nailed to the diplomats' skulls. During one of his many successful campaigns against the Ottomans, Vlad wrote to a military ally in 1462, "I have killed peasants, men and women, old and young, who lived at Oblasica and Novoselo, where the Danube flows into the sea. We killed 23,884 Turks, without counting those whom we burned in homes or the Turks whose heads were cut by our soldiers. Thus, Your Highness, you must know that I have broken the peace. Vlad's victories over the invading Ottomans were cut by our soldiers. Thus, Your Highness, you must know that I have broken the peace. Vlad's victories over the invading Ottomans were celebrated throughout Wallachia, Transylvania, and the rest of Europe. Even Pope Pius II was impressed. But Vlad also earned a much darker reputation. On one occasion, he reportedly dined among a veritable forest of defeated warriors writhing on impaled poles. It's not known whether tales of Vlad III Dracula dipping his bread in the blood of his victims are true, but stories about his unspeakable sadism swirl throughout Europe. Tens of thousands killed in total, Vlad is estimated to have killed about 80,000 people through various means. This includes some 20,000 people who were impaled and put on display outside the city of Targovist. The sight was so repulsive that the invading Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, after seeing the scale of Vlad's carnage and the thousands of decaying bodies being picked apart by crows, turned back and retreated to Constantinople. In 1476, while marching to yet another battle with the Ottomans, Vlad and a small vanguard of soldiers were ambushed, and Vlad was killed and beheaded. By most reports, his head was delivered to Mehmed II in Constantinople as a trophy to be displayed above the city's gates. When Maven Lore was being fitted for his first set of fangs, a switch within him flipped on. Something just came to the surface and everything felt right for once in my life, he said. I had this notion that there was more to it than just pointy teeth. He didn't know what to call the feeling at the time, or that it would lead him from New York to New Orleans, but he knows now that it was an awakening, his first taste of life as a vampire. Lore found belonging in New Orleans and never left. Now a crafter of bespoke acrylic fangs himself, he's risen up to the, reluctantly accepted, role of king of the Big Easy's vampire court. Being a part of the vampire court of New Orleans is about all of us coming up together. A victory for one person is a victory for all of us, he said. We're all just kind of sink or swim together. Human vampires live, and they're fairly far from the fictional creatures we recognize. Their interpretations of vampirism vary widely. Many of them feed off of energy or sexual encounters, but feeding habits and fangs are just the trappings of a community that is as diverse as it is misunderstood by non-vampires. You may not even know they're a vampire at all, at least not if you're searching for the stereotypical tip-offs. There are no restrictions for self-identifying vampires. They're not bound to nocturnal life or required to worship fictional vampires. The vampires, sometimes spelled vampires, of today are, in essence, people from different backgrounds with a common goal, belonging, who've found community with their fellow vampires. Living as a vampire is a subversive choice, a proud rejection of social norms. And in that way, it's an empowering way to live, said John Edgar Browning, a professor of liberal arts at the Savannah College of Art and Design who spent years studying vampire communities in New Orleans and Buffalo, New York. Human vampires make accessible the infinite potential that exists for exposing and unfixing the repressive and oppressive categories out of which marginalization is born, he told CNN. So, in a way, these vampires are therapeutic for us. CNN spoke to two giants of their respective communities, Lore of New Orleans and Murticus, the co-founder of the Atlanta Vampire Alliance, about their lives, their joys, and the misconceptions about vampirism they'd like to permanently put to rest. Searching for family, finding vampires. Firstly, yes, a few modern-day vampires consume blood, often from consenting donors, typically loved ones or partners, in small amounts. Many abstain from or condemn that practice and instead find sustenance in sexual encounters or other experiences from which they can derive energy, Lore and Murticus among them. When strangers feign fear and ask Lore if he'll drink their blood, he quips, "No, that's called murder." While the uninitiated are usually most interested in feeding habits, Lore said that's hardly what matters to vampires. He compared asking a vampire about their feeding habits to asking a non-vampire whether they eat cold cuts. Many vampires don't fit the archetypes Bram Stoker et al. Popularized. These are people who often work day jobs. Lore is also a graphic designer, DJ, and jeweler. Murticus is an expert in antique furnishings, and most human vampires weren't even drawn to the community because they idolized Dracula. In his ethnographic studies of human vampires, Browning said he found that members of vampire communities were mostly drawn to each other for the social elements, not their affinity for vampire media. I wouldn't even call them vampire fans at all, merely people with a shared history from their adolescence, an innate need for blood or energy, and a shared need to find others like themselves who are accepting, Browning said. Murticus was seeking answers from others like him when he joined vampire chat rooms in 1996 after noticing for years that he could draw strength from charged situations, which he came to realize later was psychic feeding. I've never felt as though my body, or even this time period, aligns with my spirit or soul, he told CNN. Or more simply, I've always felt something was different about me that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He made friends in those chat rooms that are still in his life today, and offline, those connections have grown even stronger. Lore found those connections when he first visited New Orleans 24 years ago, days before Halloween. He's lived there ever since. I didn't even know there was a community, he said. But they were family. And now, they're his family, too. He's eked out a significant role in the NOLA vampire scene. Aside from his Fongsmith business, he's also a mentor to young vampires, a role he stumbled into by accident but accepts nonetheless. He resists being called a keeper of the peace between vampires in the area, although he's known to regularly counsel and resolve arguments among members. We all just want to get along and be loved. That's why I love the vampire community, Lore said. It doesn't ***king matter what race. We all just want to get along and be loved. That's why I love the vampire community, Lore said. It doesn't ***king matter what race, what gender you are. You're accepted. What people get wrong about vampires: the enduring popularity of fictional vampires means that Murticus and others must constantly clarify that they're not like the nocturnal bloodsuckers that continue to entertain and terrify us. In fact, Murticus said, many human vampires remain out of the public eye due to the many misconceptions of what it means to be vampires and fear or reprisal from the people they know. Now Murticus said he works to educate people that vampirism is an amalgamation of physical, mental, and spiritual attributes, and vampires are largely productive members of society. Vampirism is often associated with the occult, and fictional vampires are known for engaging in human sacrifice among other grisly acts. The idea that the vampire subculture encourages and condones such behavior is untrue, Murticus said. For another, human vampire communities welcome members of all religious backgrounds. Both vampires said they resist being recognized solely for the fact that they identify as vampires. And they certainly resist aesthetic stereotypes of vampirism. Murticus said he doesn't wear fangs or goth clothes, and Lore describes his nighttime style as a cross between snazzy suit wearer and 80s rock and roll. When he's crafting fangs, he prefers to keep it casual and athleisure. Luckily, though, Murticus said, the direction in which the depiction of fictional vampires is heading is a positive, multifaceted one. Gone are the days of one-dimensional, blanched-skinned bloodsuckers. Hollywood's interpretation of the vampire has slowly begun transforming the vampire into something more human than monster, he said, referencing Barnabas Collins, the protagonist of the gothic soap opera Dark Shadows, the David Bowie starring The Hunger and adaptations of the Anne Rice classic, Interview with the Vampire. The humanity of the vampire has struck a chord with audiences, Murticus said. But those and more popular vampire properties only intensify media attention on human vampires off-screen. Murticus said he prefers to keep in the shadows. Plenty of vampire houses, clans, organizations, and individuals have carried on quite well without all the hubbub. This is what makes the tapestry of our collective experiences so richly rewarding and personally bonding as we grow older together, he said. But so long as there's interest in human vampires, Murticus said he'll be a somewhat reluctant spokesperson for them. He's even carried out surveys of fellow vampires to learn more about their backgrounds, feeding habits, and social lives. There's more to life than vampirism. Both Lore and Murticus said that vampirism doesn't occupy their entire lives. Both are in committed relationships with non-vampires, they said, and being a vampire is just one facet of who they are, not their defining quality. Murticus' Vampire Alliance of Atlanta has mostly evolved into a relatively small, tight-knit crew of aging vampires, he said. The Georgia vampire's life is relatively quieter than Lore's. He prefers to slink around restaurants, bars, and cultural events rather than work and play in New Orleans' sleepless downtown. Just as some vampire groups in New York are highly influential, almost political organizations, and Ohio's vampire community are mostly psychic feeders, according to Murticus, every vampire house, coven, or court has its own traditions and nuances. Most of us communicate with one another even if we approach the path of vampirism from different avenues of belief and practice, Murticus said. Vampires of all kinds, from all over the U.S., want to support and protect the people who have become their family. Like family, they squabble and disagree. That's where Lore steps in, to mediate. But the goal, Lore and Murticus said, is always unity. Unity to me doesn't mean we're all the same, Lore said. It means oneness of purpose. We are all family despite our differences. We love each other sometimes because of our differences. This story was covered by We Rebuilding We.